So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of background today. Just first of all, we don't have a slide for that, but Routique works with some of the largest companies in the world in food service, in pharma, as well as some of the smaller ones in Canada. So we work with the gamut of really big enterprises all the way down to local and regional SMEs. We work with the technology side, but we also work with people and processes. We're big believers that, things work better when all three of those things are in lockstep. So predominantly what we're talking about here today is the merger of those things, and obviously people who have the skills to succeed in today's and tomorrow's environment are going to be the ones that are needed. Regardless of the technology, you still have to have the right people with the right skills. So I thought I'd start with a little bit in terms of supply chain. I think, depending on your level of experience in the industry, if you're in the industry already, you probably know some of these things, but to a lot of people in the world right now, the first time they really heard the term supply chain was when COVID hit and everybody realized that they weren't getting the products that they need. The toilet paper shortages and the hoarding and things like that really brought it to the forefront. It's always been there. It's a very, very old sort of practice. Everybody's always had to move goods from where they're made to where they're needed. And really everything involved in the production and the distribution of all those raw materials and those finished goods is really what supply chain is all about. What I mainly wanted to kind of focus on here is that it's really a network. Chain is a bit of an old term, implying there's a static beginning and an end, and it's all linear. Really, it's more like a web. It is really a number of parties from big and small, from sophisticated and less sophisticated, each performing different functional components. And the ideal way to make it work well is to make it seamless. And so, at Routique, one of our mantras is to create the next generation of supply chain visionaries and to help, not just empower our customers with tools, but it's also to give them the right processes and practices to make them successful. And you're only really as strong as the weakest link in your chain or the weakest link in your web. So how do we help everybody elevate the level, of their supply chain capabilities to make sure that we work around all of these problems that we've seen in the market? So a few of the categories down below, procurement, operations, distribution. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of the course, because it's actually broken down into modules that fairly closely match the way these things typically work. But you can see this is one of the graphics from our website. You can see, regardless of the fact of how the need for this product arises, whether it's a customer placing an order or a company placing an order, or however that happens, somebody at some point puts their hands up and says, I need something. And all of these other facilities and functions are really in support of getting that from where it's, effectively where it's made, where it's manufactured, through all of these steps, all the way down to the end users. And that can include, selling it into a retail environment. It also can include, in today's world, getting that direct to the consumer and eliminating some of these steps. So in our world, we don't really care if it's improving the functions that you have right now, or if it's trying to actually be a little bit more disruptive and eliminate some of those functions. But regardless, you have to make it the most efficient that it can be. And for that to happen, all these things have to work together. So, again, a few stats here for you, and I won't belabor necessarily reading them all, but it is a very, very big category. It really sort of makes the world go round behind the scenes, regardless of whether you see it or not. It is, you could argue it's one of the biggest problems in the world right now with COVID and with the situation in Ukraine with chip shortages. Things like that have really brought it to the forefront. To us, obviously, it's getting the due that it deserves now, because it's always been there in the background, and now people are starting to realize just the sheer level of importance of it. One of the other things that was sort of mentioned near the beginning is what kind of value this can bring to you in your career. One of the unstated things that you're seeing happening now, and people like Tim Cook is a good example from Apple, is there's an awful lot of companies promoting CEOs from supply chain now. That wasn't as common back in the old days. You'd see, you know, someone who's focused more on sales or more on marketing or more on people operations. Supply chain now is a big source of C-level executive talent, which is twofold. It's great for people that are in this space as a career. It's also great to realize from an industry point of view that companies are starting to recognize the sheer importance of this. And one of the things that we talk about with customers all the time isn't just lowering costs and creating efficiencies, is how can you make your supply chain a competitive advantage? How can you actually turn it into something that you can use to secure more business, to keep customers happy, that kind of thing, as opposed to just thinking of ways to make it cheaper and more efficient. How can you make it more of a calling card in terms of customer satisfaction and growing market share? So in terms of the history, I alluded to this at the beginning, but really all we're talking about is leaps and bounds of progress in terms of technology and process, in terms of scope. You know, obviously goods have been moving since ancient times, and we've seen different iterations of how this happens. We've seen different modes of transportation. We've seen different methods of sort of building out these networks. But the short story here, not to belabor this one, is really that you know, there's nothing new under the sun here. We're talking about a series of incremental improvements over time. It just so happens that in the last few decades, just like everything else, just like Moore's laws with computing and things like that, we're seeing the time between increments really getting shorter, and the leaps and bounds in terms of capabilities getting quicker. So you know, at where we were seeing sort of evolutionary progress for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, we're now seeing fairly revolutionary progress, driven a lot by what can be done in terms of technology, as well as, you know, the globalization of the world that has really driven people to look beyond a local or regional supply chain and looking at what's happening around the world. It's also driving things like sustainability and environmental friendliness and things like that. People are starting to consider, and companies are even starting to consider, not just the cost, not just the efficiency. You know, how can we make it green? How can we make it sustainable? Both from an optics point of view, you know, making sure that the customers see them as friends and not enemies of the environment, but also the social side, the ESG, environment, social, and governance side of things, treating people right, making sure that you're not doing anything exploitative, and making sure that you're acting in a sustainable and a manageable way. So that's also you know, been a fairly rapid revolution in the last decade versus the evolutionary progress we've made in the past. In terms of the focus of what we're talking about in the micro-credentials course, it's very much supply chain focused, but it's also focused on this merger of today and tomorrow. It's not just where we're at, it's where we're going. Groups like ourselves are very focused on the technology space, but I think probably everybody's aware that technology for technology's sake does not make a lot of sense. You can't innovate in a vacuum, and creating something technically amazing, you know, as a parlor trick doesn't really help you. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you have to have the, you know, the platforms, the technology, but you also have the people and the processes in lockstep. So in order for the sector to evolve, we need to make sure that the people are evolving as well. And you can see some of the technologies we've listed along the left-hand side here, from, you know, the autonomous vehicles and electrification and drones and robotics, but also augmented and virtual reality and big data and mobility and fintech. And if anyone doesn't know what any of these things are or wants to know more, I mean, there's lots of resources online, but I'm also always happy to have people reach out to me directly if they want more info. But, you know, the short answer here, and this applies to not just end users in the industry, even people like ourselves who are relatively at the forefront of tech, it's a struggle to keep up with it. There's new innovations coming so fast and furious that, you know, it's a daily job. And that's why it's the job of people like ourselves to make sure that we are keeping up with this, and that we're helping our customers not have to constantly be navigating new minefields of new tech and what it's all about. And then the technology side really speaks to the skills side. So this is an excerpt from a DHL survey that I just pulled mainly because this one and the next slide essentially tell you how important these digital skills are to this space. Supply chain has probably suffered up until recently with an image problem, meaning it's seen as a bit of an old school industry. It's seen as a bit of a slow mover because it is so important and so fundamental to the way the world works. It's not necessarily the hottest, coolest topic until recently. But you look at some of these ones on here in terms of using optimization tools and demand forecasting and collaboration and risk analytics and in GPS and things like that. These are things that you wouldn't necessarily typically think are going to be key in an industry where you're talking about a lot of warehouse workers and drivers and more traditional dispatchers and operations managers. But from everyone from the C-level all the way down to the people driving the vehicles, the people operating in the warehouse, loading, unloading vehicles, picking and packing, all these things we'll get into in a second here. You're finding now that you're in a tech job, whether you thought you were or not. And that's probably largely true across most jobs these days, but it may be even more true about supply chain than almost any other sector, because we're coming from a place of a more old school model to a very, very modern new school model, maybe even more rapidly than most other industries are. So you're going to create, when you get that much rapid innovation, you're going to create a gap automatically between what can be done and the tools to do it and the ability of the people that need to do it. That's why I think micro-credentials are so great, whether that's to augment other forms of education or whether it's to just augment learning while you're on the job. All of those are great tools to be able to add a little bit to your skill set, add a little bit, to your capabilities, and for the company that you work with or for to do the same, to just sort of slowly upskill people over time without having to do any rapid or sort of rash decisions like taking a multi-year sabbatical to do a longer degree or doing something that has a longer horizon on it. So I think there's a call for both of those types. And you'll notice just at the bottom here, the artificial intelligence, we'll mention that a little bit more. It's really kind of eating the world right now. And you'll see this theme kind of recur through some of what we're talking about. So this is a similar chart to the other one, and it's taken from the same study. And you'll notice again, this is just one component of logistics and supply chain type work, but it shows you that what you're looking at on the left-hand side is tasks of being able to read work orders and receive oral instructions. That's now evolving to things like picking by vision, picking by voice, using augmented reality tools, using really advanced scanning tools, dealing with robotic process automation where you're actually helping orchestrate robots doing some of the heavy lifting or the dangerous things as opposed to just manual work. So the important one here is the right-hand column where you're seeing the digital literacy and the ability to use these monitoring technologies and those kind of things, straight up technical capabilities becoming more important. And then my favorite one is the bottom one, which is really just the ability to be flexible and to adapt. So, there's an advantage to learning a very, very specific skill, but there's also an advantage to just learning to learn or remembering, keeping up that ability to learn and to be adaptable so that as the industry that you work in changes, you can adapt to it as well. And one thing I find from the work that I do with customers, we work with everyone from the C-suite, as I said, to people working in the warehouse and people driving vehicles. The longer you've had staying static, the longer you've had in a plateau mode, the harder it is to make your next adaptation. If you're constantly learning, you're constantly evolving, you're constantly open to new ideas and new techniques, you can very readily adapt to a new system, a new process, a new policy. If you haven't had to do that for a long time, it gets, I would say, almost exponentially harder to keep up. So learning to learn, I would say, is just as valuable as learning the specific skill itself, and keeping your brain adaptable and flexible to new situations. So the course is broken down in a way that, you know, I think aligns quite well with typical supply chain processes. And we when we were working together on how the course was going to flow, we basically tried to mimic the typical order that these things would appear in if you're just studying you know, standard supply chain management functionality. So there's an intro to the course, obviously, and I'm going to go through a little bit of that right after this, that will outline in more detail what all these things are. But S&OP is a short way of saying sales and operations planning. And really that is getting to the level of, as I said at the beginning, how do I know what's coming? How do I know how much I'm going to need? How do I know how much demand there will be? How do I match the supply to the demand? If you can't do that part well, the rest of these operations are going to be in jeopardy, because if you get an unexpected spike or drop in demand, that can create problems down the chain. Procurement is really sort of managing the vendors that you have and the purchasing process. So, you know, if you use a warehouse as a microcosm of all of this, we're talking about how do we get things into the system? How do we get either, you know, ingredients and components for a manufacturing process? How do we purchase order those down so that we have the materials we need to make what we make? Or in the cases of where you're just dealing in finished goods, how do we get goods in the door so that we can then have the goods that we need to send out on the downstream processes? So the next one is that warehousing side. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well, in terms of, you know, the not just the management of the warehouse, but ideating on how do you design the most efficient warehouse operation, whether that is you're deciding to build a new building, you're acquiring an existing building, or you're leasing an existing building. How do you make the most of that physical facility? Or whether it's just taking what you have and making it more efficient. You know, one could be seen as, you know, building a new home. The other one could be seen as remodeling or redecorating. Effectively for us, that's you know, part and parcel of the same exercise, which is what do we have to work with? What are the constraints, and how do we make the most of that? Transportation, obviously, you know, affects both sides, the inbound and the outbound side. And really that is, you know, while those goods are in transit, you know, how are they being handled? How are they being monitored? But it's also the relationships you have with transportation providers, whether that's your own fleet or someone else. And how do you manage those relationships to ensure that you get what you need to and from where it needs to be? Sales and service is one people forget all the time. We often hear supply chain talked about in a vacuum. And in a lot of cases, it has a very, very strong effect on the sales and the service side. We have, for example, distributors in our network who are talking to customers on behalf of manufacturers. They're delivering product either to an end customer or to a retail shop, and that manufacturer has never spoken to that retailer. The entire experience they have with that manufacturer is delivered by that distributor. So conversely, on the customer side, Amazon has you know, the 800-pound gorilla in the space has set the bar so incredibly high for expectations. Anyone who's as old as me on the call will remember, you know, routinely waiting 6 to 8 weeks for a product, thinking nothing of it, not even really being that upset when it didn't come in 6 to 8 weeks, and being told it might be another 6 to 8 weeks, especially if you're shipping from overseas. Now, Amazon has created some really interesting effects where delivery time can often be the biggest arbiter of whether you'll purchase a product. And I'm guilty of this myself. And I've talked to a lot of other people who are, where you'll go, I can get the same product 5 days from now, or I can get the same product tomorrow. I'll choose tomorrow. I don't need it tomorrow. You know, sort of fundamentally, I know that there's a cost to that. There's an environmental cost and a physical cost to it, but they've gotten people addicted a little bit to the quality and the speed and the efficiency of that service. And so, you know, I think that's a really important thing to remember. Managing partner networks. This is where a lot of this stuff really falls down. In theory, it's not that cumbersome to manage a supply chain. If you control the whole thing, if you own it, if there's only a few parties in it, it gets exponentially messier and more difficult when you're talking about working with enterprises and tiny SMEs, people with lots of sophistication and less, people with high expectations and people with lower expectations, and trying to make those all work as one. And then the end of the course, we talk a little bit about the future of supply chain. So again, not just where things are, but where they're going, and very much lean into a lot of those technologies now that are in our world. Those are really fundamental, but to a lot of the end users, they're just up and coming. They're not quite sure where they're going to go with those yet. So, you know, in terms of the intro, I don't think we need to spend too much time on this, but really what we're trying to do is set students up for the intro to systems thinking, and really sort of understanding how the pieces fit together. To me, it's more the why and the how than it is the what. So, you know, who cares about any of this in the first place? Why does it even matter? And what are the effects of one thing going wrong on the rest of the system? How can those, you know, the good things or the bad things be amplified up and down the chain? Common terminologies. Again, there's a lot of definitions that you know, are fairly commonplace in the space that maybe not everyone knows. And even if you're in the space, not everybody defines them the same. So trying to create a little bit of consistency there, really focusing on the customer side. It isn't just about moving a good, it's about a promise you're making. The same as any other component of any business. Everything you say is a promise that you then either have an opportunity to keep or not keep. And every time you don't keep one, you've created a deficit in the customer's mind. So supply chain is no different. Things like ETAs and delivery times, and, you know, on time and in full, and damage and shorting of orders, all those things have a detrimental effect on the customer relationship. And if the people working in supply chain don't remember that, A, they don't have a bigger mission to strive for, and B, they'll get themselves into trouble fairly quickly if they don't remember the importance of what they do to the customer. And then KPIs, how do we measure those things? So I mentioned SOP, S&OP in the beginning. You know, really what we're talking about here at a high level is how to match supply with demand. So the first step to doing that is, how do you actually figure out how much demand there is? And then the second step is going based on what I have access to, based on my facilities, my capabilities, my size of my team, my sophistication level, the lag times that it takes me to get supplies in. How do I best match the supply to the demand? And that goes to inventory and planning and measuring as well. I'm going to leave this one a little bit aside because this is one of the examples we're using in more detail at the end. But just to give you an idea, without accurate, or as accurate as you can have, forecasting of demand and then matching of supply, all of these other things are going to be more difficult to do downstream. So procurement, as I mentioned, you know, most people think of that as just procuring, buying. We need to buy things. We need to buy equipment. We need to buy componentry or raw ingredients if we're making a food product. You know, and that's literally what they think of, but it's much bigger than that. It's who do you buy from? You know, how do you negotiate those terms? How do you negotiate the rates? How do you hold those groups accountable? How do you be accountable to those groups? How do you make sure that, you know, you've got the right partners at each level? How do you make sure you're giving them what you need and they're giving you what you need? How do you measure them? You know, for lack of a better term, keep them honest and keep yourselves honest. And what is the right mix of those? You know, in some cases, you may need two suppliers that supply the same thing. You may need some redundancy. You may need some backup. You may need one that costs a little more, but can get something quicker in a pinch. You may need something that you've got a better negotiated rate on. You normally use them because your rates are better, but they take a little longer. You may have to deal with things like minimum order size. You know, how do you match the fact that a supplier, even though the pricing is better, requires a minimum order that is so substantial that you can't actually sell enough product to use that before it expires, for example. So all of these things are really, really important. And, you know, perhaps the very last step in the process is actually procuring the goods. All of the rest of the stuff is much more strategic, much more high level, needs to be looked at more holistically than just, can I get a cheaper price and who will give me the cheapest price? In fact, oftentimes chasing cheapest prices is one of the worst strategies, especially if what you're procuring from a supplier is mission critical. In that case, you really have to look at prioritizing what happens if I don't get the goods, what happens if they're the wrong ones, what happens if there's an issue with the quality or there's damage, versus necessarily getting the best price. And then, as I said, I think there's a theme through this entire micro-credentials course, which is strategically, how do you do these things? How do you set them up? But then measuring success. That's a lot of where the technology comes in, is you have a great relationship with a supplier. You negotiate that on an annual term. You have a rep that works with you that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, but how do you actually know if things are sliding? How do you know if your KPIs are being met? Without some kind of a measurement tool in place, it's going to be difficult to know until your next review, or until there's a catastrophic event that something's gone wrong there. So that is not specific to procurement. You'll see that theme, and if you end up taking the course, you'll see it heavily. How do we measure and monitor ongoing, not just set these things up and sort of walk away from them? And then scalability is very much along the same lines. It's going, I could manage all these things one-on-one very granularly. I could be very micromanagey with suppliers. Can I do that at scale? As I grow, how am I going to implement that? And that's another place where technology really comes in. Is, we look at technology as amplification of your capabilities. It's how can we make a human able to perform better with less stress, less effort? How can we make people's lives easier and also allow them to get more done? And that's a really important part of the process. If you're doing a manual step every day that costs 2 hours, what's the value of replacing that with something automated, less error prone, and taking that stress level away from that person to allow them to do bigger and better things? So on the warehousing side, this is probably one of the bigger pieces that we cover, along with transportation. It's really where, proverbially and almost physically, the rubber starts to hit the road. And it's how do we not just manage a single warehouse? How do we manage a network? And a network can be a single warehouse with other providers upstream and downstream. It can also be a warehouse in a plant, or multiple warehouses, multiple plants, big distribution centers, small regional ones, micro fulfillment centers. The core here is that no matter the size or the sophistication level of your operation, you have to look at it holistically. And so we'll work with clients that, they have 3 distribution centers in 3 different cities. They're not just trying to optimize each one. They are doing that, but they're also trying to optimize each one in the network. They're trying to manage movement of stock and goods, inbound and outbound, movement of orders shipped out, in such a way that they take the best advantage of each of those facilities. So this one's a really big one, and there's a lot to go through here, but we talk a little bit about, the ideating on the flow of goods through the warehouse. So if you're manufacturing, how does that happen? If you're doing quality control, how does that happen? If you've got claims and damages, how does that get dealt with? And then you've got, your inbound processes for receiving, so everything coming into the warehouse. You've got all the actions that happen within that warehouse, which would be, things like picking and packing and loading and staging. So taking products, out of a pallet, off a shelf, out of a bin, mixing those to fulfill a specific order, palletizing them or packaging them in some way, putting them in a box or a tote or a pallet, labeling them, making sure they get to the right place, potentially staging them for loading into a vehicle. All of these things all work together to sort of make the warehouse sing. And a warehouse, you can compare all these things to an ecosystem, to a living entity. All this action has to happen harmoniously and in sync. And one issue in one place is going to create issues everywhere else. And those issues can be a physical problem, like a machine breaking down, like a forklift breaking, like a truck not arriving on time, things like that. But more often than not, they're just breaks in the flow of data. You can have everything, your equipment's running perfectly. Everybody showed up for their shift. There's no issues there. You can still have absolutely massive issues created by discrepancies in, what you would call in software world, your single source of truth. So who knows what's actually happening? What's the real picture? How does this actually work? So we go through a little bit about, process flow, and then physical location and layout of the warehouse, and either how that decision was made in the first place, or how you could make it if you're looking at a new greenfield space. We also look at, what if you're suspicious that things aren't as efficient as they could be? How do you go through and actually set those set up your targets and set up your goals, and then how do you actually decide and iterate on the best way to do these things? I'll just give you one quick example from one of our clients. They wanted to do an analysis of all 3 of their distribution centers. They wanted to look at making some very big wholesale changes to especially their main warehouse. So you're talking about essentially remodeling the entire warehouse and moving 6,000 some odd pallet positions around. Not a small undertaking, quite disruptive, fairly expensive, potentially adding some new equipment, some new racking, some new side boom forklifts, those kind of things. Not something that anybody wants to personally go, I'm pretty sure this is going to work, without some solid evidence. And so we actually used our AI-based modeling capabilities to build 8 versions of the warehouse, the current one that they have, and 7 different iterations. And then we actually used our machine learning-based processes to test the flow of current orders, their last year's orders, through the real warehouse and 7 new versions of it. And we actually determined which one worked best. And the client is actually implementing that now, despite the fact that they've tried to do this 3 times before. And if I had to sort of look at the reason why I think that they finally did it, it's because they could see the results. They didn't get charts and spreadsheets. They got physical, 3-dimensional, position accurate layouts of the warehouse with everything running, with simulations to show how it would actually work. You can literally watch it like a TV show if you want to see how it functions, and it makes it much easier. So a lot of this type of analysis that we're talking about in the credentials course is really about de-risking decisions. And anyone who works for a living right now, who works for any company, you can probably be fairly certain that's high up on the list. People are really motivated by 2 things: is a potential positive outcome, but even more in some cases, not having a potential negative outcome. So in some cases, a negative reinforcement can be stronger than a positive one, meaning I'm pretty sure this is a good idea, but I'm also a little worried about what happens if it doesn't work. So that's a common theme throughout the course as well, is how these things can be de-risked with technology so that we're able to do what we need to do. Transportation, again, I think everybody knows fundamentally what transportation is, but we're not talking about, how do you get in a vehicle and take some stock somewhere. We're talking about how do you build a strategy for transportation that can be, again, as simple or as complex as it needs to be. I have 3 trucks. How do I efficiently get them around? How do I move them from place to place? How do I decide where they go? How do I decide what loads go in each one? You're looking at capacity. You're looking at, clustering drops or deliveries or pickups in a way that is most efficient. That can also be done in a really complicated network where that is 26 different transportation companies you're working with, plus your own fleet, and each one has to be optimized within the chain. So very much like some of the other processes, how do we actually set ourselves up from a strategic level to manage that network correctly? And then you'll see it again there, monitoring how important that is. It's not just strategizing and setting up the right network, it's monitoring it on a constant basis. And step 1 is make sure I have a true picture of what's happening today. But we always find with our customers, as soon as they have a true picture of today, they're going, how do I tell what's going to happen tomorrow? So going from descriptive, knowing what's happening now, to prescriptive or predictive, going, can the system tell me what's going to happen tomorrow? once again, de-risking the future, really being prepared for a change that we didn't necessarily see coming. I think that probably covers that one fairly well. The sales and customer service side I alluded to already, and really, the biggest thing here is that the product you're selling, if you're selling a product, is not just the physical good itself. It's the experience. It's everything from placing the order to dealing with support, to dealing with negotiations on the pricing, to what happens if it's damaged, how do I return it, how do I get a credit for it, how do I get a second one. It's also, when did it arrive, what condition it arrived in. So remembering these things, and this module really covers this off, is like, how do we make sure that we're keeping the promise that we've made as a brand, not just we gave you the thing that you bought, but all of those other things, the right condition, the right time, the right price, the right items, no damage, no shorts, that kind of thing. Exactly when we said we'd get it there, or exactly within the window that we promised you. And then the last two are quite interesting to me. Once we've sort of wrapped all this up, it's really focusing on the network side. If you are a manufacturer looking to get your product to market, if you're a retailer looking to get your products from the market, if you are someone in between, like a third-party logistics provider or a warehouse company or a transportation firm, how do you organize yourself to make the most of the network that is around you? And so this is a really interesting exercise, because it involves more than yourselves, more than your own company. It involves any number and any level of sophistication of different partners. But the really fun part is that every node in every network is usually a node in someone else's network. So if you are a transportation company, you're working with multiple suppliers and multiple retailers or customers. If you're a warehouse, you've got multiple ones. If you're a manufacturer, you're working with multiple 3PLs and many, many retailers. If you're a retailer, you're working with many of those as well. And so you could pretty much find that if you mapped all these networks in Canada or around the world, what you're talking about is a whole bunch of interconnected networks, and a problem with one will cause problems in the other. So we really get into the meat in this section of how you set that up. Are you looking at a gig economy style delivery system like Uber? Are you looking at owning your own vehicles? Are you looking at farming it out to one big transportation firm? Are you looking to send everything through couriers? And same with the warehousing side. Are you going to build a warehouse? Are you going to buy one? Are you going to acquire one, or work with one third party that has warehouses across the country, or a whole bunch of small ones? And what are the pluses and minuses of those? And how do you orchestrate that network, no matter how complicated? And then the final one is probably the most fun, is the future of supply chain. And we really get into a lot of those technologies that we mentioned at the beginning. It's not a lot in terms of exactly how you would, we wouldn't tell you how to deploy blockchain. We wouldn't tell you how to build AI models. What we're trying to let you know is what's possible, what can be done, what can some of these technologies be used for, what to watch. If you have a penchant for this, or you're really interested in these technologies, what are the possible use cases for them for the future, and where are they really going? So kind of a fun way to end it all off. And then I thought we would talk just a little bit about S&OP, mainly because it's a little bit more bite-sized than some of the others. I mentioned there's quite a lot of complexity in warehouse and transportation, and so we thought we'd just jump into this one as far as our brief example. And as I mentioned, the S&OP side is really at its high level. It's very complex, but at its high level, it's how are we managing supply and demand? How are we matching those? And so the three things you see, and this is actually a screenshot from the course, is how do we, with some level of accuracy and consistency, predict the demand that there's going to be for our products? So that can be, we have food clients and beer clients and vaccine clients and office supplies and car parts. Every one of those demand curves, or those time series of data, is going to be totally different. And beer, for example, can be quite seasonal. Ice cream, very, very, very seasonal. Vaccines, very, anything pharma, very much responsive to things like COVID. That, they just go off the charts, extra demand when you see something arise in terms of a crisis. So it's a whole bunch of mathematical forecasting, but it's also just thinking clearly about things and going, where's this industry going? Where is this is it on the rise? Is it on the decline? And what factors are going to affect it? And really things like seasonality, cyclicality. Do we sell more on Monday, or do we sell more on Friday before a weekend? Do we sell more in July than we do in December? Do we sell more during a pandemic or less? And all those things are things that have to be thought of in terms of managing the demand. And then the supply side is going, it sounds easy, I think I'll need 10,000 of these in July, until you go, oh, wait, I can't get them that fast. What's my lag time? If I'm making them out of other ingredients, what's my lag time for those? What's the effect of a shortage of one of those components or ingredients? And so that's all that operational constraint side is, do I have enough data to go, if I think I'll need this much in this month, I can actually accurately produce that much. If I have a shortfall, what do I do with it? If I have a surplus, what do I do with it? How does that affect my other operations? So it's basically a little equation that you have to constantly balance, and you will never get this right. It's not possible to get it right. It's how close can you be? It would be very much a statistical impossibility to match your supply and your demand 100%. So without incurring costs that were so prohibitive that you'd be throwing away half your code dated product, or you'd be, your storage costs would be inconceivable. So you're trying to maintain a balance. You're trying to maintain the best cost for production of the supply or acquisition of the supply to meet the demand most often. And then you're trying to build in contingencies to react to things like COVID that just throw everybody for a loop. And so some of the things you can use on the demand side, market intelligence and environmental factors, as I mentioned. So regardless of the fact that my mathematical model says I'm selling a little bit more next month than I did this month, what happens when there is an environmental consideration? A great example would be everybody's forecasts for sales in March and April of 2020 probably got completely thrown out the window when COVID created all those lockdowns, especially if you were a supplier to, restaurants and bars, or you were a supplier to anybody who dealt with consumers outside the home. Things went mad. Conversely, companies like Peloton that were selling exercise bikes for people in homes, everybody that was selling, weight equipment and things like that, absolutely went through the roof. They didn't see that coming either. So how do you react to those things? Then it's not just planning for changes in demand that you couldn't control, it's planning for changes in demand that you can control. So what have you done on the pricing side or the marketing side? Have you created a sale and then not actually managed your supply to match that, knowing that you were expecting to sell twice as much? So demand shaping is really the act of changing the demand curve, like actually acting on it. That can be putting something on sale to sell more. It can be creating a promotion or a bundle. It can be adding a new line or a new product that's more, indicative of what the market's looking for. It can just be ramping up your spend on marketing and making sure that you're doing that. One great example would be, I have too much stock of this thing, so I'm going to put it on sale and I'm going to do a big promotion. That's a way to shape demand for it and then move it out of the system if you don't want it. Sales forecasting, I've already talked quite a bit about. But basically, again, you're looking at trying to figure out the best way that you can to make sure that you're managing, the demand that's upcoming. And then this one's kind of an interesting one. It's really, focused quite a bit on the manufacturing side. So assuming that you're making the goods, but you can do the same exact analysis whether you're procuring products to sell, meaning you're buying something that you're just selling directly, or you're taking components and ingredients and making them. So, looking at, again, a material resource plan is really, how am I going to get the things that I need to sell? So if I'm making beer, how am I going to get the hops and all the other ingredients that go in there? What is the lead time? What's the lag time? What's the minimum order? How do I balance that inbound stock that's coming in? The production schedule would be actually producing it. So once I've got those ingredients on site, how do I produce it? And the procurement strategy and the planning is really looking at, who should I be getting it from, and am I getting the right supply from the right suppliers? And there's quite a lot of examples in the course, but the one you're seeing here is really just an example again of that same balancing equation. If I need this much beer in July and I need to start making that in April, then when do I have to procure my ingredients by, and what are my options there if things don't work out exactly as planned? And what do I do when the forecast is wrong, because it always is? How do I actually, what we typically call netting, how do I adjust for things on an ongoing basis? I don't just make a plan for the year and then leave it. I make a plan potentially for the year, and then I revise it every week, every month, however often it makes sense, based on all the new information I have. Another one that people forget all the time is storage availability. And this is probably the #1 problem in the world right now in supply chain. We won't get into too much detail right now, but just in time, if everyone's familiar with that, basically this movement to sort of minimize inventory and minimize stock on hand and just have what you need for the shortest turnaround as possible. Really big movement. When COVID hit, sort of collapsed under its own weight. People realized that without any safety stock, without any buffer, an event like COVID throws things into disarray worldwide. Everyone started moving to what they're calling just in case, so having enough safety stock on hand, but companies haven't been very good at it for quite a long time. And so in the absence of good information, everybody is maintaining too much stock, more than they need. And this is our #1 challenge in our world right now from customers, is going, how do I store all this excess product? Where do I put it? Everyone's running around trying to make the most insane deals possible with anyone who has warehouse space to just store stock that likely they shouldn't have produced anyway, or they sent it to the wrong place, because in the absence of really accurate data and forecasts, I just feel like I need to maintain a lot more stock, but I don't have a good idea of how much that should be. So the entire world's request for capacity went up probably 30–40%. You can't build warehouses that quickly. And we had this massive mismatch between what people wanted to store and what could be stored. And then again, just to sort of reiterate, we go through a lot of the processes in terms of how these happen, the inputs to a process and the process itself and the outputs. This is another very common theme, with the systems thinking focus on the course, is everybody's input is someone else's output and vice versa. Every process depends on the upstream processes and the downstream processes, really getting students thinking of, I don't just do my job, I do my job, and I need something from the other group to do it well, and I need to provide something to the next group for them to do their job well. And that's another common problem in supply chain today, is too much isolation, too much siloed thinking. Nobody's necessarily explaining to team members the importance of their role and how they fit in with everything else. And then there's, through the course, there's a lot of interactivity. There's a lot of little mini quizzes and questions. As we talked about at the beginning, there's a final assessment, which gives you a chance to actually put your own editorial spin on this, actually take an example from your own world and work with it. But, I will be here anytime to answer any questions. We can always kind of get into any sort of specific use cases or examples that you want to chat about. And really the idea here is to not just passively read, it's to sort of actively read and test your knowledge and move forward and really try to gain a very usable skill set and tool set once the course is completed. So that's my portion, and happy to join in and take any questions, and really appreciate everybody's time.